On Monday, February 10th, President Trump announced 25% tariffs on all U.S. imports of steel and aluminum. To discuss the impact of the tariff announcement, I'm delighted to be here with Charles Lichfield, the Deputy Director of the GeoEconomics Center. My name is Jörn Fleck. I head up the Europe Center here at the Atlantic Council. And so we will dive into that tariff announcement a little bit. We saw in the Trump 1 administration, President Trump also announcing tariffs on steel and aluminum. Charles, is this simply a repeat of 2018, or are there differences with Monday's announcement?
Well, it's very similar because last time, at least with the EU, that was what started the tit-for-tat tariffs, which in the end were contained, and it didn't get so bad. We managed to keep it to steel and aluminum and then a few other symbolic sectors. So it's starting with the same opening shot. What's different is that it's 25% for both steel and aluminum this time. Last time it was 10% on aluminium. What else is different? It's slightly broader in its applications, slightly higher up the production train and also further down. And also there are no exemptions for Canada and Mexico this time, which does have implications for the EU because the EU is a very close trading partner with the US, but Canada and Mexico are even closer. The US is not a big export destination for EU steel and aluminium. That it is really at the high end where the EU has other competitive advantages, not just on price.
Before we go to the impact of those tariffs, what do you think is the motivation? What's the strategic goal of the Trump administration? We've seen tariffs being used in sort of three ways. One is to achieve non-trade political ends, as with Canada and Mexico, over border security, to protect U.S. industries and U.S. sectors, and third, as a revenue-raising tool, or a combination of the three. What is it in this case, given that President Trump has announced the tariffs will go into effect on March 4th?
Well, I think the fact that there's a little bit of time before they come in tells you that they do expect to start negotiating. I think it's probably unrealistic to expect that negotiations can remove any tariffs that the US might impose on the EU, but perhaps the EU could get itself a special deal. The EU would also have to offer some things in return, so let's see. But there is time for the negotiations, so that's definitely one of the intentions. And on the other two you mentioned, I mean, the whole pretext of the tariffs is national security. It was last time as well. They used Section 232. The justification is that the US should not rely on foreign trade partners for this essential item, or these two items that are necessary for national defense. I mean, the EU is a good partner, but even so, it's far away, it's an ocean away. So there is a sort of national security pretext that is sort of justifiable. And then on the third, which is revenue raising, if you look at the US government's income currently, tariff income is very, very small compared to internal taxation. Now, the Trump administration claims that it can change that and it can therefore reduce internal taxes. Let's see, but it's going to require, I think, a little bit more than just tariffs on steel and aluminium.
President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, promised a firm and proportionate response in her first reaction to the announcement. What do you think are the key tools that the European Commission...
Let me ask you, what do you think they are?
So, I mean, they can certainly, do retaliatory tariffs. And we saw that in 2018, where we had spirits like bourbon and whiskey, motorcycles, also steel and aluminum, electronics, and other product categories being targeted by the European Union. And then since then, I think the European Commission and the EU writ large has added their anti-coercion instrument as an additional tool. And that's a much more flexible toolbox to go after, in a sort of extreme case, after intellectual property rights restrictions, to use export controls and other measures.
And even in extreme cases, even go after US firms that may not be involved in the dispute that triggered this. So the EU always presents the anti-coercion instrument as the nuclear option, as a deterrent. But it's true that they do have the legal basis to do that now.
And that was the big news last week, at least speculation about the European Commission in retaliation to potential Trump tariffs hitting US big tech, right? That was the FT story that discussed that. I personally think that's unlikely that the European Commission will go to that to the nuclear option, as you called it, but would be interested in your take on that.
I think in response to the steel and aluminium tariffs that are announced, I think they'll try to keep it to a fairly conventional, in inverted commas, trade retaliation, so countervailing measures against what the US has done. But they do want to make sure that this administration understands that they have this up their sleeve. So they'll mention it, but I think in response to tariffs simply on steel and aluminium, it may not be the right moment.
I agree, and I think you saw that in President von der Leyen's statement, proportionate being in there, in addition to firm response. An additional question would be really around the negotiation. What's the art of the possible in terms of the European Commission putting something on the table that could make a good deal for President Trump in this context?
I think, well, the Commission and EU capitals have been careful to show and tell people like us that they have a lot of positive things to present to President Trump. I think there's still a question over how the conversation takes place and through which channel. President Trump has spoken to the EU in his previous term and did engage with the EU, but he doesn't much like it, so that may be delegated to someone else. Vice President Vance is in Europe this week, but I saw that he didn't attend Commission President von der Leyen's speech at the AI summit. He left early, so I'm not sure he's going to be the channel. So we need to identify channels. But once that happens, I think there are positive things the EU can say to the US. The EU is buying a lot of US liquefied natural gas, a lot of US weapons due to the war in Ukraine, which was started by Russia. So there are things the EU can say that it's already doing, and present this as part of a new positive relationship. Thanks to you, President Trump, you awakened us to our need to invest in our defense, etc. So there is a way they can present this in a positive way, but I still have my doubts and my fears about this relationship. You mentioned tech. Vice President Vance mentioned in his speech the EU propensity to overregulate tech, and this being unfair to US firms. I think that also is a predominant feeling in the Trump administration and something that they blame the Europeans for. So it's a difficult conversation.
And what about the impact on the US economy? I mean, we've heard a lot about the inflationary impact of tariffs, even if that evidence seems to be ignored in the White House. Last time we saw shrinking use of steel capacity in the United States after the tariffs. What can we expect on that front? What are you watching out for?
Well, to be fair to the Trump administration, when tariffs are brought in, it often has an effect on currencies as well. So the dollar has been appreciating. It has appreciated a lot over the past few years. So it's one reason why they think they can tolerate the tariffs, and also a reason why some of the US partners aren't so fearful of targeted tariffs on sectors. They think they can overcome them, although they don't like them on principle. I don't think that it will result in a big bonanza of investment into the US. One reason is, for instance, a European firm that's used to working with a particular kind of steel and aluminium that may be interested in putting a factory in the US. If it's more complicated for them to access their supply chain because of the tariffs on these inputs, they may think again about investing. So I'm thinking of the car industry, for instance. So I think the effect that is being sold by the Trump administration, one in which tariffs create investment in the US, that isn't true. It's more complicated. And so the inflationary effects are there, although they can be dampened a bit by currency. So I don't think it will necessarily have the effects that they're hoping for.
Well, thank you so much, Charles, for exploring a little bit the impact and the outlook for the next few weeks as we wait for negotiations to take place before the tariffs that President Trump announced on steel and aluminum are due to come in early March. Continue to watch Atlantic Council work in this field from the GeoEconomics Center and from the Europe Center, and we look forward to continuing to bring you updates on the negotiations and this field of trade and economic relations between the United States and the European Union.